Welcome to the Culinary Time Machine. I'm Chef Nakia and this is Smokey. And in this show, we discuss the history of food and the evolution of cooking. And our little kitty here, Smokey, since she wants to be part of this episode, we're gonna do something called Smokey's Suggestions. And we'll start out with this book, Consider the Fork. I've been reading this and Smokey has been sitting next to me sometimes as I do. It is written by B. Wilson. It is a history of how we cook and eat. And I have found it very interesting. I'm maybe a third of the way through it. So, all right, Smokey left now. But Smokey's Suggestions, book recommendations from Smokey it'll be a new segment. But what we're actually really gonna be talking about this episode is how cooking has evolved. And specifically how cooking evolved throughout like prehistoric times. We're not going to get too much into the written history times because in this first season of the show, we're really focusing mostly on prehistory. All right, so to start, I want to remind everybody the difference that I see between cooking and food prep in general. So to me, food prep also includes like peeling and dicing vegetables, thinly slicing fish and pickling it, pickling vegetables, doing any sort of work with food that does not include any kind of a heat element. Whereas cooking is applying heat to food to change some of its physical, sometimes chemical characteristics. Now in your kitchen and my kitchen, the difference between food preparation and cooking might not make that much of a difference, but in what we're talking about with the history of cooking and evolution of cooking, I do think that distinguishing between the two is important. Even before we were cooking, we were doing some kind of food prep, right? Because food prep would even be considered like butchering an animal, which is something we don't need to get into all the details about on this show, but using stone tools to separate meat from the bones and or skin and other organs and whatnot is food prep. Using a heavy stone to smash the shell of a nut to get to the edible inside is food prep. Maybe like rinsing off some fresh berries in a river nearby or something could be food prep. So the types of food prep that we were probably doing before humans discovered cooking might have looked a lot like what chimps and some other animals do to like prep food today, which would include like cracking nuts, tearing open a fruit to eat the inside without the skin, and like I was mentioning before, like butchering an animal. Of course, like the contemporary technique of like peeling a fruit and dicing it and whatnot is more exact than tearing open a fruit to eat the inside, but both would be considered food prep, and prehistoric humans were, I'm sure, doing those types of activities also. So if we want to look at how cooking has evolved, we can even take that one extra step back and look at how food prep started, and then along with how cooking will have evolved, the food prep that pairs along with that cooking has also evolved. Oh, hi, sorry for the interruption. As I was editing this video, I realized that I got very long-winded. What I decided to do is go ahead and cut out some of the information that I share and put it in a whole separate video. That way, if that is of interest to you, you can go and watch that video. Or if not, we'll get back into how cooking styles have evolved. The information that I cut out and put in a separate video includes me explaining how heat is transferred and then different cooking styles. So I get pretty specific with examples, and if you love food science and really like learning the culinary basics, then definitely go watch the video. It's linked in the description box also. It is a bit of additional watching, like bonus content, if you will. So I will see you over there if you decide to go watch it, and if not, then we'll get you back into the originally programmed material. Whenever we think about the evolution of cooking, we're going to start with cooking methods that take much less control of fire. You don't need to be completely in control of your heat source, to contemporary times when we have a lot of control over our heat source. Like if you have a gas stove, you have a lot of options as to how big you want that flame or how small you want that flame. In like an oven, you can set it to a specific temperature. So we today have a lot of control in how hot our heat is, in somewhat like the directions that the heat is being focused. I mean, think about, we also have like blow torches. So if we make a creme brulee, we can torch just the sugar on the very top, right? We have immense control over how we heat our food today. In prehistoric times, especially when you were thinking about open fire cooking, you do not have nearly as much control over the heat. You have some control in practice, in learning like what different materials you can place in the fire, what may burn hotter. So it's not that you didn't have any control at all, but if we are looking at the evolution of cooking, the spectrum begins with very low control over fire, and today we have very high control over our heat sources. I think a lot of times when we think of of cooking over a fire, we kind of picture what we do oftentimes when we go camping, or maybe putting a marshmallow on a stick and heating it over the fire, or you may do like shish kebabs, or that type of food. So yes, people may have been cooking by skewering their food and holding it over the fire. They also may have skewered that food and put that stick in the ground next to the fire. So the Maka and Yorok tribes do this today with salmon, more ceremonial way. They're still doing this. So if you look up like Yorok salmon cooking, you'll see what I mean with the salmon skewered on sticks, and then that fire, instead of it being more round, it is like a longer column of fire, and from time to time they can rake the coals up, and that will of course allow more radiant heat to hit the fish that are along the side there. So that style of cooking can absolutely have been used for hundreds of thousands of years. Got that. We've got like holding a stick over a fire. We also have, like I had mentioned before, putting food on a hot stone in the fire, or the stone could have been in the fire and then pulled out to the edge of the fire so it's still fairly warm, but not like directly in the fire, and you can put your food in there. Some vegetables, like some root vegetables, may have just been placed in the fire because the skin can blister and burn while the insides can get nice and soft, and then you wouldn't necessarily need to eat that outside skin part, but it would make the inside edible and able to get to, right? Some root vegetables, they're really difficult to actually get through the skin into, and once you get there, may not be edible. So root vegetables, potentially, depending on especially how like thick their skin, everything was, could have been placed in the fire, or some coals from the fire could have been pulled to the side and root vegetables cooked that way. The simmering or boiling water method with the hot stones is another way. And then earth ovens or kivas are another way. And so you would create an enclosed space either through something that existed in nature, like not necessarily a whole cave, but right, a smaller version of a cave, and or continuing to build layers upon and around it with mud to enclose that space. And then you could either build a fire in that, let it burn down, and then add your food to, and it would cook within that earth oven, or again, like moving coals over. Now with those earth ovens, you may have seen some steaming going on in those, because you could add, if you had like pottery with water in it, you could add that to it, or you could use like leaves or other foliage that is very moist, and have put those in there. And as they get warm and the water is evaporating, then it's going to be subtly steaming your food. If you think about like a Hawaiian pig roast, this is another great example. Dig the hole, build the fire in it. Some of those hot coals you can place even in the pig, and then you place the pig in the hole and cover it and allow it to slow roast for many, many hours. These are some of the examples of prehistoric cooking styles. And not only do we want to think about, okay, how little control did you need of fire in order to be able to do these things, but also how efficient could you use the heat that you were producing? Because depending on where you are, you may or may not have a readily available amount of firewood or other flammable materials. For example, yes, like grasses burn, but they burn so quickly that you're not going to get hours of heat from a pile of grasses, right? You want, like, wood is slower burning and it can still get pretty hot. I know it's not delicious to think about when we're talking about food, but plenty of people have burned animal dung throughout the history of humans, because it will burn and stay hot. But if you have a bunch of firewood at your disposal, you're probably going to choose to use that over other materials. However, right, as humans and throughout human history, we've been very creative and very resilient. And so if there is not firewood, we will still figure out things that we can burn in order to cook food. The issue is that if you don't have much flammable material around, it's even more important that your cooking is efficient, because you don't want to have to build a really hot, long fire in order to cook something for like 16 hours, right? It's much more likely you will utilize the heat from that fire to cook something as quickly as you can in order to conserve materials. And it's not like you're gonna let that fire die down completely, but you just may be able to allow the fire to be a little bit smaller, right? You don't have to add so much material to it to get it to be so hot. You can keep it a little smaller, and then build it up to cook and then let it die back down a little bit. So efficiency in how you're using your heat is another really important thing to consider as we are looking at how cooking styles have evolved over time. It's very likely that the more efficient uses of heat would have become more common cooking practices. These cooking methods that require pottery, the first examples of pots, those would have evolved more as our societies became more sedentary and more agrarian. Because if you are migrating multiple times throughout the year, it's less likely that you are going to want to carry heavy clay pots with you. It's also likely that if you do make one, it may be dropped and broken when you're on the move. The styles of cooking that use pottery are going to become much more prevalent in agrarian societies than in hunter-gatherer societies. Also, as we begin farming, typically we are farming grains, like cereal grains. And next episode we'll talk a lot more about this stuff, but cereal grains typically needed to be cooked into kind of like a porridge in order for them to be edible. So that you're going to use that pottery, water, and the cereal grain to cook that into a porridge. Along with that too, you can begin to make dishes that are more like soups because you have those potteries to cook multiple ingredients in. Now, some say that like animal skulls or shells, like from seafood, could have been used before pottery, but shells and skulls are only so large, and when we're thinking about the efficiency of cooking, to me it feels unlikely that there would have been many soup type dishes made in a small vessel of a skull, because in these hunter-gatherer societies, you were typically cooking for, everybody. And it's not that like every single night everyone had to eat the same meal, but it wasn't like, oh, I'm just cooking one thing for myself. It was more often where you'd probably be cooking in order to share with your close-knit band. So I do think that the wet, moist heat cooking methods became much more prevalent once we moved to more agrarian societies. And with that too, people were building hearths in their homes so that they had, a fire in their home. And from there, roasting methods could have become pretty different also because you have additional tools to use when you are cooking. Similarly with the clay pots, when you are migrating a lot, it's less likely that you are going to want to carry a lot of specialty cooking tools with you. But once you are settled in a home, then you will begin acquiring and being sure to hold on to some of these tools that you find help you either be able to maneuver hot food without burning your hands, or kind of keep food in a specific place so that it can be more efficiently heated. Again, pottery is a huge one, but also specific types of, carved bone or antler type tools could have been used to move food around. Now, once we go from the Stone Age into the Bronze Age, then we're really gonna see a lot of cooking tool technology evolve and change because being able to utilize bronze, and then especially as we move into the Iron Age later, those materials are going to be very useful for cooking. But we'll get into that later. Okay, so when we look at the prehistory of humans, cooking has evolved as we've found ways to better control fire and be more efficient with how we are cooking food in order to preserve the resources needed to build those fires. In future episodes, we will look at how cooking styles have evolved throughout written human history, throughout the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, and continuing to look at how the technological advances in the tools that we use for cooking had a huge impact on the styles of cooking, how the styles of cooking evolved and how they have become so unique in different parts of the world. Come back in 2 weeks and I'll be talking about how foods and humans have co-evolved. I think one of the best summarizing questions of this is, did we domesticate wheat or did wheat domesticate us? So we'll dive into that in 2 weeks. And in the meantime, please like and subscribe if you like this and if you love learning about the evolution of cooking and history of food. Let me know in the comments what some of your favorite topics around this are. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon.